Hey, everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we have the pleasure and honor of having on our good friend, something of a role model and mentor to me as like one of the great researchers of our time, who's been in it a long time, and that is Mr. Grant Cameron. So, welcome, Grant.
Well, thank you, James. And you're one of the few guys that I can actually talk to about this because you actually understand the whole concept of what's really going on here. Like, what are we dealing with here? Because most people are sort of on different levels and they see it as they see it. But I think you and I would both agree that this thing is many times more complex than people think it is. And you need a sort of a background in terms of other things, not just UFOs. It's much more than UFOs.
Absolutely. And that even gets into, the Jim Semivan indigestible thing where he's talking about it's not these other physical beings necessarily, and UFOs and crash and retrieval material and the straightforward UFO flying saucer thing. It's a whole kind of ontological perspective of reality and what is the nature of reality and how and and how these intelligences are interacting with us through whatever means they can do it. I mean, and the way that more limited in the way that we can perceive it.
Yeah, I even in my paper, we're going to talk about this paper that I wrote, but I just added today the final word I give to Jim Semivan, and he says his famous quote. He says, "It teases you, it cajoles you, it lies to you, but you can't take it home to meet the family. That's not allowed."
Yeah, yeah. And so this article, Grant, is there what's the kind of theme of this article?
Okay, well, what happened was I was with my co-author. We do a lot of talking, and so she was talking to me, and she was really upset because she watched the second part of the Skywatcher series, where these guys are tracking these objects and they're showing these videos of the objects and stuff like that. And she was really upset because her fiance was all into this, and she thought this was insulting that they were using this word called the dog catcher, and mostly that they basically didn't want any ufologists involved in the research effort in this thing. They just wanted science. And I've always had this sort of a thing about science is this idea that when you get into science, you're into nuts and bolts, and that sort of puts you down the wrong road. And I'm more into the idea that I had this revelation that there's more to it. This consciousness aspect is primary. So when she was telling me this, I thought, well, I should take a look at this thing. And then I looked at it, and all these ideas started coming to me as to what was going on. And it's the same sort of thing as it's sort of like these guys are after technology, and these are guys that have filmed this sort of stuff. And I was thinking, because I've got a lot of background in ufology, and we know the Skinwalker Ranch story is very famous, and they've called this thing, and they've got this thing at 3,000 feet, and they were shooting rockets at it, doing all sorts of stuff, and shooting beams at it, stuff like that. And you and I are both familiar. Greer has called him in. I wrote two books on the Mission Rama thing, and they were calling in things. And so this Skywatcher program is a program where they have what they call a dog whistle that is able to make these things manifest, right away, and that they're trying to film it. And then you start seeing all this bizarre stuff going on in the background, which we would call the trickster phenomena or the theory of wow, where the phenomena is playing games and stuff like that. And so I thought, well, I should sort of look at this. And the more I looked at it, the more it sort of made sense as to what's going on. And my biggest reason for writing the paper is to defend consciousness and experiencers again, because basically what has happened here is we're after science, we're after technology, nuts and bolts. We're going to get this technology. We're going to, they're going to use a dog catcher, and we're going to catch the dog and put it in a cage, and we're going to train it. And we're going to get the technology. We're going to have free energy, and everybody's going to be rich and have 5 cars and 12 houses and stuff like this. And I basically am saying, no, no, this is not how it works based upon my experience. And I was sort of insulted after I looked through the whole thing too, was the fact that I've done this for 50 years. And even though I don't have a PhD in astrophysics or whatever, I've been at it long enough to know that there's a bunch of stuff that they're completely missing the boat on in terms of how this phenomena works. And it's almost like they've come along and we're the guys that are planting the turnips and they're on the turnip truck and they just fell off and suddenly because they figure they're on top of something, they're going to unravel us. But you and I have seen it many times where everybody like Greer, we've unraveled this thing, we've figured it out, and it just gets more complex. And you find out, no, you really don't have any control of this phenomena at all. The phenomena is actually the one that's running the show. We're the ones that are the dogs on the leash, and they're leading us around. And when you sort of surrender yourself to understand this phenomena, that it's so much more complex, and that to me, it's a phenomena that's here and it's teaching us through these weird things that it does. And so I wanted to write up this sort of thing to sort of my impression was to warn these guys that it's not going to be as simple as they think it is, where you can sort of bring it in because they're now making this claim that they're going to have a UFO by the end of the year, and they're going to have this, back engine of the technology. And I've been in it long enough to know all these stories where, this story that was just told to me by um, Jack Sarfati, the story where the Navy guy, his friend, Navy guy was running the program, and that the Navy guy actually said to him, not only is this thing self-conscious, the phenomena, the craft is conscious and alive, it is a free will, and it can do what it wants, and that it will not allow you into the craft until your mind is right. And so then I listen. Go back to you remember the Lakatsky interview where he's at the 2011 congressional facility, and he tells Senator Reid and
Yeah.
this Undersecretary of Defense, he said, we've gotten into this craft. So you start thinking, did it take them that long to get in the craft? And this was the idea that this Navy guy that Jack Sarfati was dealing with said that he had been allowed inside the craft by the craft, but nobody else was allowed inside the craft, and he was able to fly the craft and this sort of thing. And that's where I just want to point out in this paper, which is now 45 pages long, is this idea that it's almost comes back to what Ron Pandolfi said back in 1991 when he first was engaged by Dan Smith, where he said to Dan, he said, we have a phenomenology problem. And that's what the point I want to make. And this is not UFOs as far as I'm concerned. It's not we're going to get these little crafts and we're going to back engineer them and stuff like that. This is phenomenology. This is a very complex sort of thing, which can manifest as a craft. It can manifest as a being, can manifest as an orb. It can manifest as all sorts of things. And it's much more complex than we think. So I sort of put this paper out to say, okay, you think you've got these objects here, but as was pointed out in my paper, once you start seeing the games where they're sitting there and then suddenly the radar or the sensors, it's messing with the sensors. And so I say, well, you think there's an objective object out there. There's me here and there's an objective object. The moon is behind me when I'm not looking. It's an objective object. And you assume that it's always going to be the same. But when it starts messing with your data, when it starts messing with your sensors, and when you can't see it when you go into the air, and when it looks like it's going to crash and it doesn't crash, you start seeing this trickster phenomena where it's doing this sort of stuff, or where they turn the beam to hit it with an energy weapon and it shuts their whole system down. Then you realize that this phenomena is not exactly what you think it is, and it's using this weird thing where it's appearing as one phenomena, or the one that they had, the one object they had, they thought it was the number seven was the jellyfish, and they thought it was a black object, a black object, and then they saw it at a different angle, and it looked like it was gold, and then it looked like it was white, and then you start saying, well, is this thing just being seen different, or is it actually morphing? Which you and I would know that this phenomena can morph, it can change. I've had two experiences myself back in the 70s where it started as one object, and when it got to me, it was another object. So the whole paper just looks at this whole thing and says, you think it's this, take a look at this bizarre stuff, take a look at this bizarre stuff, and just get you the idea where you think, holy cow, maybe it's not going to be as simple as these guys think it is. They think they've got this thing under control and they're going to back engineer this stuff. And it's like everybody's thought that in the past
Right.
many, many times, and it hasn't come to be.
Right. And that's exactly correct. And again, even let's say with Dr. Stephen Greer and Mission Rama, right? Mission Rama claimed that they had
Yeah.
landings and they had the Zendra, these portals open, the way the individuals went into the portals and had this whole experience. But getting to the 90s with Dr. Stephen Greer, when they were in the UK, they had a near landing of a UFO in a field over there. People started to freak out and left the site, and then the UFO kind of went up and went away. But also, kind of the nuance in this is again the perspective and the reflective quality. Where
Yeah,
if you think you're going to go, like, you're not going to trick the UFO phenomenon into like, oh, we're going to get you to land. I mean, they would have to do it willingly, number one.
yeah,
Number two, when you go into the kind of contact modalities and the intention is exploitative, right? You're trying to exploit
yeah,
the phenomenon in some way. Again, even with the best of intentions,
yeah,
even with the best of intentions, say you want to ask the UFO to land so we can take the technology and develop peace on Earth, right? It's just not,
yeah,
it doesn't work like that. And it hasn't for the last 80, 90 years, maybe even millennia before that, that we've been interacting with these non-human intelligences through different means. And, there's another, so yeah. And you know, Dr. Stephen Greer and Mission Rama, when they went into the contact work, the basis of what they were doing was founded in the priority was the genuine connection with these non-human intelligence for peaceful interaction.
yeah,
And I believe that is why they had, and people will argue, oh, well, they don't have any evidence. I'll say that is why they had such success, because I think that they did, and
yeah,
definitely in the interactions that they had. And again, it it's one thing to have the interaction. It's another thing when the cameras are rolling and you're trying to collect evidence.
yeah,
It's not the same. So I mean, I tell people, and there's an individual working on a psionics documentary right now, um, who I think he's going into it very well intentioned. But if you want to have the true experience with the phenomenon, you have to take all that's the kind of idea that you're going to record and document it for even of the best of reasons,
yeah,
and put that aside at least. So if you want to have the real experience with the phenomenon, do that, see what that experience is, and then afterwards figure out how you want to try and document that. But I don't think that's going to be
yeah.
um, so.
Yeah, so because what's happened is that this is just another modality. They talk about it. Fowler talks about it in an interview he does where he talks about in 2021 they're doing a war games thing. And then this guy calls him up with a camera and says, "Come take a look at this." The guy's running the camera. Take a look at this. And there's the six objects over them. So they spent from 2021 to 2022 making the right assumption, saying, what did we do that attracted these phenomena? And in 2022, they had 250 encounters with this number class, what number one I think it was, and that's when they did this idea of the dog whistle came. So they brought him in, but Stephen Greer can bring him in. I don't care what anybody else says. Stephen Greer can bring him in.
Yeah, and
Mission Rama can
I've been
definitely bring
there.
him,
Yeah,
and you can bring him in.
yeah,
It's just another modality of bringing the thing in. It's what happens when you get it, because that's when you get this reflective phenomena that Brandon Fugel will talk about, where he warns people when you go on the ranch, be careful what you think when you go on the ranch, because this thing is reflective. And you can see that the phenomena it will change on Skinwalker Ranch. You have six people all watching; they're all seeing different stuff, and it's not until you get into a position where they allow you to film, and people will like the biggest event I ever had was the 2020 Mount Shasta event, where they levitated nine people in the air, and this being showed up on the edge of the forest, which was filmed. When they were filming this, they didn't realize they're going to catch us on film. They asked permission, "Can we film?" And people know this because it's Skinwalker Ranch. Remember, they set up the one camera against the other camera,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
the one camera went down. And when they looked, they'd ripped all the cables down off of, the tape and all this sort of stuff. And that's the thing is, John Alexander pointed out, not only do they know what you're doing, they know what you're about to do. And so we got to get away from this idea that we're going to sort of trick them, or this is an objective object that we can film and we can back engineer. You got to realize this is an alive object. May not even be an object. It may just be a phenomena that is able to manifest in our reality, and that you've got to go to the more important thing rather than trying to prove to the skeptics, because you get this sort of thing where it's almost like you're afraid to stand out. Like now I saw at the Seoul conference, they're in Italy, they're going to have a SETI speaker. And I'm going, come on, we're going backwards here. Like, and
Yeah.
it's like we're trying to impress the scientific community that we can prove this thing. And basically, the more important thing is forget about proving it to everybody and try to figure out what it is. And that's when you have to go to people like you who have had engagements with the intelligence and with people who claim that they're in contact with the intelligence and find that's the more valid way to go. And you'll start learning these lessons about what they're trying to teach us and get lessons of what this whole thing about. The idea of trying to film it to prove it to people is totally going to be, I think, sort of a waste of time. Although it does raise consciousness to the fact that people know what it is. But we've done this for 80 years. We now all we got is better sensors, better cameras, but we've done this for 80 years. And just because you can pick up something on film doesn't mean anything. Because if you can go back to the Trent films in the 1950s or Adamski's video or
Yeah.
photographs,
Yeah.
you say, well, is that real? He took out photographs too. And you go, well, those aren't real. These are real photographs. And it's the same thing. It's like the phenomenon is morphing. It's changing from one phenomena to another phenomenon. We're filming it, and we think because we got better sensors, we're just going to get more stuff. And it's like when you get Lakatsky, when Lakatsky said, the guy that ran the OSAP program said they had 250,000 or whatever it was sightings, and every single sighting was different. Then you start looking at this whole thing that, if we sort of think that if we get another 200,000 sightings with better sensors, that we're going to figure it out. It's just another 250,000. It's like the idea of insanity. What's the definition of insanity? Keep doing the same thing and hoping the results are going to change. We've done this for 80 years, trying to film it, trying to document it, try to prove it to the skeptics and stuff like that. And I think the results that we've had the best of is to have people engage where now they've actually confirmed a lot of the stuff. UFOs exist. There's bodies, there's crafts. That's all been told to us by experiencers. And this whole thing that the craft is conscious. I had 36 people tell me that. There's all sorts of people. Now you see the high level people like Lakatsky and Semivan and all these people now put off, now admitting, yet the craft is conscious. And that's the whole thing. If it hadn't been for experiencers, we wouldn't have known that. That probably would never have been made public. But the experiencers told us that. Nobody believes the experiencers. And the experiencers can tell you so much more than a video or a film. That's just it's like entertainment type value because you see the same thing at Skinwalker Ranch. They've got the phenomena, they've got it, and they're trying to film it. And they're doing different experiments, but they haven't captured it. The thing is always walking around them, sidestepping them, playing games on them and stuff like that. Like the one with the rocket, where people think, okay, we got radar. We've got radar now. We can track the radar. So what happened in Skinwalker Ranch when they had that thing at 3,000 feet, and then what's his name says, okay, let's redo the experiment with the laser, but let's send a rocket up. It's like make it big for history TV, and they fire this rocket up. The guy's watching it on the radar, and instead of going, it looked like it went straight up, and then when they looked on the radar, it was going in a sort of in a circle, and it went through the right into the ridge and it came back out the other side. Like it went right through the mountain and came out. And they're going, that's impossible. And that's this whole trickster thing that just because you got big radar and established sensors, they can play with the sensors. So what's your data worth? You can say, well, we got this data, but if it's messing with the sensors, what good is the data? You can say that's good. This is all repeatable data, but have you left out all the times that it played with the sensors? What if it's actually making the results on the sensors, and that's not really what's happening? It's playing with sensors. If it can turn the sensors off, it can play with the data on the sensors. So what value is the stuff? Same with the photographs. If you can't see it from the air, or if the photos are changing, and the people or they say that the photos are there, but what people see on the ground is different than what's up there. How valid is your information? All it's proving to me is this trickster phenomena, that the phenomena is like, it's like if you sit quietly at the scene instead of filming, just sit there quietly, you can hear them laughing. I mean, they're just having a joke. It's like, okay, let's almost like the Nimitz thing where I make the joke where they say they were sitting for a week, sitting there hovering, waiting for Nimitz.
Yeah.
Oh, are these guys ever going to see us? Turn the lights up. They can't see us. Come on. And then finally they decide to come. Okay, here comes the jets. And then they tell Zogar to go under the water and make the big, huge, giant bubbles. Make bubbles here. And then they go flying by. Look at these bubbles under the water. And you see this trickster thing, which George Hansen, who lives near you, has talked about for years. He's a PhD, and he worked in parapsychology in the lab, and he's done the experiments and all this sort of stuff. And he has this thing, this warning, and he warns the parapsychology community that you're wasting your time, that you have to get past this whole thing about getting the data, that this thing can play with the data. And it's the same thing in the UFO phenomena. In the warning that George Hansen gives is clearly that it's not what you think it is. It's way ahead of you, and you think you're going to trap this thing and contain it. Give your head a shake, because this thing is always going to be ahead of you.
Yeah, I hope I can get George Hansen on here because I tried a few times some years ago, but
Yeah, I'll
fingers
set up a
crossed.
meeting with you. He's one of I call him the biggest intellectual in the UFO world, and yet nobody knows who he is.
Right.
But when you
Yeah.
sit down and talk to this guy, you realize like he doesn't really have a computer. He doesn't have he doesn't stay on the internet. I don't know how he made,
Yeah,
but he knows everything about everything, and he sees it from like a scientific perspective because he worked in a
yeah.
scientific lab for so many years, and that he just sort of gave up. He just realized that this is a waste of time trying, and plus he's a magician. So he knows the whole thing about deceiving people and all that kind of stuff. But a very interesting guy who I think you'll love him because he understands where we are in terms of the fact that this is a very complex phenomena, and he's worked on it for what 4 or 5 decades.
Yeah, and he's got the book, The Trickster and the Paranormal. People can check out way ahead of his time. It was actually the Hermetic Penetrator that put me onto his work.
Yeah,
And again, just if people are interested in the phenomenon, again, we can talk about UFOs and the phenomenon, but that is something you definitely want to check out that book. He's got like an old school website that's
yeah,
still up. I don't know if the email works. It didn't work for me, but again, there's this. And again, Ben, getting back to Stephen Greer, what I meant to say is that I was at several Stephen Greer events where there was genuine anomalous
yeah,
phenomena, and it comes to this thing too with Christopher Bledsoe. People see some of the videos, and some of the videos that Chris Bledsoe posts are they're not all anomalous phenomena. He
yeah,
gets ahead of himself, but I absolutely believe there's a lot of you know connection with the phenomenon there going on with Chris and Stephen Greer. And again, if people want to look at a really good case that was untouched by the public for many years, I would invite you to look at Dorothy Izat and
right.
her case, her work. Again, this is going back several decades, and it's talking about all this stuff, the consciousness stuff. And even for Dorothy Izat, she had the same thing where her her perspective and point of view influenced how the interaction with the phenomenon. And when it was all positive for her initially, and then some individual came to her and warned her and said, "Hey, you better watch out about these
Yeah,
phenomena. They're this and that." And as soon as that seed was planted in her head, she started having more uh, troubling experiences until she flipped it back around and said, "No, wait a second." And then she had an unveiling or more genuine experience of the phenomena again, and that was that it was not negative anymore, but she was seeing how it was reflective to her state of consciousness. And that's going on with, again, with this thing with the Skywatcher, right? Or with Skinwalker Ranch is with the mindset that in which you're approaching the phenomenon is you're going to get what you perceive almost, right? And it's
yeah,
almost this lesson kind of thing. Because if you go out with a group of people for CE5 or contact modalities, depending on what group of people you have together and what the collective consciousness is, even if it's a subconscious consensus within that group, is going to change the
yeah,
dynamic of the
yeah,
interaction
exactly.
and the contact. And it's funny because if you have very kind of again this idea of surrendering, right? And I know people might take that the wrong way, and it's like, oh, you're letting demons in or something like that. It's not like that. It's a willingness to let go of your frameworks of what you think it is. And it's a surrendering of what you think you know. So make it a clean slate and allow the phenomenon to manifest as it will, right? And
Yeah,
you're going to get a
yeah,
completely different thing than what you walked in assuming it was or what the experience was going to be.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's like you're waiting for the lesson because even if whether it's Stephen Greer, whether it's you, or the only exception would be maybe Mission Rama. Nobody gets them to land. I mean, nobody has actual encounters with aliens and stuff like that. What the phenomena is doing is it's opening your mind. It's like, wow, it stays far enough away, almost like the same as these guys. So they said they think the thing is going to land, and then when you actually look at the data, the thing never gets within 5 kilometers, and it's always just sort of out of the view, and the film is not very good, and they play this game all the time where it's sort of it's leading you like with breadcrumbs and is
yeah.
dragging you into exploring for yourself because they're never going to land because they want you to figure it out. They don't if they wanted to land, they would have landed for Stephen Greer 50 years ago and stuff like that. So that's not the objective. It's to get you into a mindset, and then people get into the mindset and they realize maybe there's a mind that you can meditation that you can use and like Greer uses or something like that, and people get into that, and suddenly they're having these other experiences which are much more meaningful in terms of actually interacting with the beings. But even then, it's a lot of it's sort of like etheric. It's not really face to face type thing, and that's what's going on. It's never. It's like that's where this semi-band says it'll never take you home to meet the family. It's always testing you, it's cajoling you, doing this sort of stuff, and it's keeping you interested and moving you along. So the idea that these things are going to get them to land. Now, I don't know about the Jake Barber thing, that whole thing with this thing
Well,
landing. That's a thing which I really can't figure out yet, except that he
well,
had the experience with the female. When he described that, I knew he was telling the real because I had this experience with the psychedelics where I had this female thing, which I had it on tape. Destin used to have the tape, but I had so much swearing and I was so excited. I thought I was crazy when
yeah.
I listened to the tape. I went, oh, because I was talking. There was this woman, and it was like the way Barbara described it. It was like it was just overcoming. It was like I couldn't believe it. There was this, and it was a woman. I could feel this. I didn't see anything or anything, but I could just feel that I was dealing with some sort of woman. And I don't know that thing about whether they got things to land, but if that's what we're going to do, I mean, welcome to Earth. We're gonna make you land, and then we're gonna. What are they gonna? I always say to people, what are you gonna do? You either gonna put them in shackles and send them to El Salvador, or you're gonna let them walk the streets of America. And I don't think anything is either is going to happen. That doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. We haven't thought past that final point about what do you do? That's what Walker asked us. So when you actually figure out what are you going to do with it? If it lands, what are you going to do with it? And nobody's really thought about that. It's sort of like we're sort of at the entertainment stage, but the phenomena is doing this trickster thing through wow. I call it the Jesus circus, where they're trying to get you looking, and then you get the message. Once they get your attention, then they can give you the message, but not until.
Yeah. And with the Skywatcher thing and the Jake Barber story, I think there's a few different things going on there potentially. Uh, one thing is that and funny, speaking of the female presence, and during one of my like lock-on experiences where I had this whole Kundalini thing and I saw the
Yeah.
physical craft really close, for me that there was like a male and female presence for
Wow.
whatever reason. And I had this visual of of course, you know, uh, Nordic type entities, right? And I
Yeah.
don't know, I still say I don't know if they just put that there for me to have something to relate to, understand as an idea and a concept, and it was not literal. I don't know. But with the Skywatcher thing, they were confident that they can get some of these objects to land. And I think because when they were at this controlled site, right, the range where they were getting all these landings, there's probably a few things that were going on. And number one, you actually get into this a little bit in the article that you wrote, right? Where I think some of the stuff that, like James Fowler and some of the stuff that they're picking up was advanced human technology, right? And I think that maybe even some of what is going on with Skywatcher's testing, right, of different things actually, because I wouldn't be surprised at all if some of the stuff that's going on now, even with like the ability to use a dog whistle and call these objects in is calling in some kind of advanced human DARPA tech, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's just a speculation. And
Yeah.
again,
And he admits that. Bowler admits
Right.
that too.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's
And
the whole thing. That's the thing about the timing, which I didn't realize until somebody else brought it up. They come at the same time every day. Remember, they asked him, they said, well, why does it come at the same time every day? And he said, I'll skip that question. I would love for him to answer that question
yeah.
because that was the whole thing. We did the Bob Lazar thing. We wrote the book a couple months after Bob Lazar went public. So we were watching the whole thing as it was taking place. And I actually had a conversation with John Lear the night after they got caught with the camo dudes, where they're out there and they're
Yeah.
watching this test. And the whole thing was that they would test every Wednesday at 8 o'clock at night. And
Yeah.
that's military, that they test at the same time. It's military time. So they test at the same time. And that was what one suggestions was, that it's military tech because it comes at the same time every day. Why would an alien come at the same time every day? It makes more sense that this is alien tech. And one of the things he did say was, remember, he said he was going into skiffs, that he's dealing with the military, and they kept saying, "Oh, we're not really interested. We don't really know," or whatever. And then in 2024, they said they're not really interested. Just give us the UAP data. And it was
Yeah.
almost like, give us the UAP data. We want to see what kind of stuff you're picking up on our equipment. And that's
Yeah.
one of the possibilities that is there with that timing thing. So maybe when he answers the question, it'll be something else. He seemed to have some explanation of why it's coming at the same time every day. But that's military testing if it's coming at the same time every day.
Yeah. So this idea that you might get the objects to land. I don't know if, two different things is like one, I don't know if you're going to get that to happen with real NHI technology. Number two, if your intention from the beginning is exploitation, and again, even with the best of intentions, I just don't see it happening,
Yeah.
right? The non-human intelligence,
Yeah.
again, that's just even that term is like, the phenomenon or the beings or the intelligence.
And
They
they right there they have to explain why they can't get it within 5 kilometers. 5 kilometers indicates that the phenomena doesn't really trust you. It's way out there, and it's almost like a breadcrumb. It's not giving you anything that really 100% valid. It's sort of like giving you an idea, but it's not proving anything. And they're not going to land on the White House lawn. They're not going to come in close so you can get a real good shot of it. That's basically they're playing this game. That's why th're 5 kilometers away.
Yeah, and for experiencers who are having more regular encounters, they'll tell you, you can have an orb come within a few feet of you,
Yeah.
right? And it's because of where you're coming from. It's your mindset, your level of readiness, kind of. Um, so and that's because they're trying to understand, they're genuinely trying to understand what's going on, without the idea of we're gonna somehow exploit this,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
And if they know
They
you got a camera, everybody knows whether it's, you know, Linda Howe at the cattle mutilations where all the batteries are going dead. I mean, they're playing this thing where if you got a camera, you forget to turn it on, you forget you got the camera, the batteries go dead, nothing shows up on the film and stuff like that. It's this whole thing. They'll only allow you to film if they want you to film. You got to get permission.
and two things to this too is like during and maybe this was in 2011. It was 2010 or 2011 where I had a camcorder and I was trying to record a lot of the CE5 work. I was doing like hours a day, like
Yeah.
too much, but very responsive. And I had recorded some stuff and the camcorder just straight disappeared. And there's nobody there that was going to take it. It was me, my partner, and my family members, and one friend. And I recorded, and the recording wasn't like fantastic. It was good, and it was a camcorder, but that camcorder, like, it disappeared. I never found it to this day. And there was no place it could have gone. I only went from outside to the car
Yeah.
to in the house, and that
Yeah.
and that was it. But
Yeah. I had similar. Let me tell you two similar experiences I had. I had the one that got me involved in May of 1975 was the famous CKY film. So CKY film, they had two 6-inch pieces, and it was filmed by a camera 8 1/3 miles away. They knew exactly where the thing was on the ground. The thing jumped from the ground to 5,000 feet in the air in 3 frames. So it was going faster than the Nimitz, but it was going the other way. It was jumping from the ground up into the air. And this film, I went to the guy who filmed it and I said, "Can I get a copy of the film?" And he said, "No, every time I copy it for somebody, it disappears." And I sort of finally kept bugging him. He said, "Okay, make a copy." So he made me a copy, and it was on a 6-inch metal reel. And I had it in my house, and I sold my house, and I moved. And of course, do you think I could find that metal reel? It was like how do you lose a 6-inch metal reel? And so then my friend Mark gave me a piece that was from the gifting field, from the Tim Taylor whole
Right.
thing at the gifting field, and had this piece. And so then he said, you can have the piece. And I had the piece, and I've shown photographs of this thing. And then Mark says, "Oh, can I have the piece back? I'd like to have the piece back. Can you cut it? You can cut off a piece for yourself." So I said, "Okay." So I get the saw and I cut off a piece. I give him the piece, and then he comes to me and he says, I lost a piece." And I said, "You lost a piece? Come on, you had that." And he said, "Can you cut a little piece off yours?" And I said, "Mine's only like a little tiny triangle. It's only about this big." And I said, okay, I cut off a piece." And then I moved to Vancouver. And I said, before I go, I get this in the drawers, in the right-hand drawer. I said, got to make sure I got that piece. Don't lose that piece. You think I can find the piece? It's gone. It's like,
Yeah, and there's the story
unreal.
of Dr. Joseph Burks.
Yeah,
He went out uh, to Mexico with Stephen Greer and the CSETI team in the early days when they were on fires in the early 90s.
yeah,
Stephen Greer was the Christopher Bledsoe of the 1990s. He had the high level intelligence people with him, and everybody would say back then in the 90s that Stephen Greer couldn't go anywhere without UFOs following him,
yeah,
right? And so it's this whole repetition. The whole thing's happened again with Chris Bledsoe, except I I think Chris Bledsoe is more, Stephen Greer in a sense was a little bit more of a wild card. Like you don't know what the guy is
yeah,
gonna do,
yeah, yeah,
right? For a few reasons, and but they were trying to record this a giant triangle that came in the proximity of this volcano in Mexico, physical triangle, and the camera kept crapping out,
yeah.
and it was like one of those more mechanical cameras. It wasn't like a digital thing, and it just was not working, right? And that's on behalf of the phenomenon, and that people don't like to hear that, but that's a, a lot of par for the course of what's going on with the phenomenon and these interactions.
Yeah, they love that. I'll give you another story. I had the one with Chris Bledsoe. I wrote the whole Chris Bledsoe story up in 2014 in my book, Alien Bedtime Stories. And one of the things that he's never talked about that's in the thing with the photographs is he had a camera. He had somebody given him people always giving him cameras to take pictures. So he had this camera. It was a German $1,000 camera, and he had this camera. And he went out. And there was this golden orb came by, and he photographed this golden orb. And suddenly all the film went sort of crazy. The camera went crazy, and it started to I call them melted pictures. So if you look, I have three of them. He's given me three photographs that were taken with this camera, and it just looked like the picture had melted. Like you'd see the face, you could sort of see it, but it was all like everything had melted. And so he said it was like that. The camera was ruined. It was he only used it one time or twice, I think, and that was it. Brand new camera, and this thing had done this, and it couldn't take photographs anymore after he photographed this golden orb. So then I said, well, where'd you get the camera from? So then he gives me the camera model and everything. And I contacted the camera makers and I said, I got this camera and something's wrong. It's get these pictures and they're all painted. What would cause that? And then they said, oh, just send the camera back. We'll give you another camera. I said, no, I don't want to have another camera. I just want you to know how to explain this. And they would not explain. They kept going. So just send us the camera. We'll give you another camera. And so this is the whole idea. So Chris started that way. Now he's got a lot of success. But you see, he's asked for permission.
Right.
He seems to have this interact. But at the beginning, people don't realize he wasn't able to film as well. And you see this over and over again where stuff is disappearing or they're playing these, and that's this trickster phenomena that I didn't really take it that serious until I was calling it a different thing. But it is this phenomena that's part of the thing is to keep you in awe and curiosity and not to give you the answer, to sort of keep you interested and do weird things because it's the weird things, the weird stories that you tell everybody else. And that's what they want. They want these weird stories. So everybody's looking at it. What is going on here? Like, did you hear that story about this? Or you hear that story about that?
Yeah.
It's just so weird.
Well, and so for people that are going out and they want to try to get evidence, and again, what you said, ask permission. So,
Yeah.
as silly as that sounds, if when you're going out and trying to do some psionic process, just ask permission. Say, number one, I want to have the interaction first and foremost. That's the most
Yeah.
important. But second, may I please record this for the betterment of the understanding of our civilization, our consciousness, whatever. That you really need to set that as the foundation.
Yeah, and you
Um,
need to get your head straight. You got to do the meditation thing. You got to quiet the mind.
yeah,
And that's the Mission Rama idea was that you got to raise your vibration and the phenomena will lower its vibration that you can meet in between. Now, whether
right,
that's
right,
real or not, but everybody knows this thing about because I remember Ricardo Gonzalez.
yeah.
Desta had gone to an event he was doing at Crestone,
Colorado,
Colorado,
yeah, yeah,
and they had the event there, and all the people were gathered and whatever. And Ricardo went to Desta, and he said nothing's going to happen tonight. They're just not ready. And what you see this in C5 events where people are there and they tell you, like in the Mission Rama, I think it goes for a day and a half. They're meditating and oming and praying and doing this sort of stuff. And it's like it's so repetition. It's like, oh my goodness, like what are we doing this for? And what they're trying to do is this raise the vibration, and then Saturday night the event will happen. So when Ricardo says no, it's not going to happen, and you'll see this often in C5 events where people are talking, they got lasers flashing in the
yeah.
sky, and they're just not in there. And Ricardo picked it up. He said it's not going to happen. So they went back to the hotel after this thing, nothing happened. Went back to the hotel, and Dessa said it was the biggest light show she'd ever seen in her life. They're on the balcony, and these things were flying around and stuff like that. But they were in the right mindset, and these other people weren't.
Yeah, and one example of that is we had this. I'll call it a high level CE5 group, just because we were all kind of in tune to the consciousness, you know, oneness kind of idea thing, and everybody was experienced in CE5, and we would meet once a month in upstate New York in this like very open, beautiful location. And again, everybody was on the same page because we had been working together for a few years. So
Yeah.
we get together, we're in this collective consciousness space, and that nobody's like we're trying to track down this evidence. Like the what I mean, and I'm not trying to say that in a derogatory way, but what I mean is like the conditions were right for these kind of interactions to occur. And this one time, uh, it was everybody was in the circle and they were waiting for me and the two people I was with to get there to complete the circle because I was running a little late that day. And everybody's in the circle, and as soon as we get there, we're just going to start our processes. And within 2 minutes, we had this absolutely beautiful golden craft come in over the center of the group, and it was super low, and it had these beams of like, I swear to God, the only way I can describe it is like this angelic beams of like rays of golden light. And it was just a touching experience for everybody. And again, we had not even started our processes, but again, that the energy, the vibe was right. The people's collective consciousness was coherent. So those conditions were appropriate for the phenomenon to interact in a more direct way.
And that's what Skywatcher is missing. That's what was my main objective in the paper is you don't realize this kind of stuff. You just came in a couple of years ago and you think this is just a solid nuts and bolts craft and we got the technology. We'll solve this whole thing in a couple of almost like the special forces guys that go at the skinwalker, and there's next thing they're running for their life, and
Yeah.
it's this idea that you have like it crosses over, it's all paranormal phenomena. So what you're going to see is if you've got the background for all the paranormal phenomena, you suddenly realize, oh, this is exactly what happens in seances. In a lot of seances, you're not allowed in. They have certain members, and those people appear every week for years before something really happens, and they won't allow you in. They won't allow any negative energy into the room and stuff like that. And that's this whole similar idea is that they're trying to raise their vibration and make this contact and stuff. And it's a different type of phenomenon. And that's when you get like Stuart Alexander. He has very restricted people who are allowed into sound, and that's the guy that makes the hand appear. And about to interview another guy who's had really bizarre experiences out of Liverpool, England, and he saw the hand appear as well. So in order to make hands appear, like physical hands in seances, you need a very coherent set in the room, and because the door's locked, you don't want people freaking out and being afraid or being, having negative energy and stuff like that. And you see this crosses not just UFOs. You'll see the same pattern all over the place in various phenomena, that the mind is an extremely important part of it, and that the mind may be what it's all about. Is that even John Mack went there at the end of his life, where if you're in fear, you may see a gray. If you're a very high energy, you may see a reptilian, and if you're very religious, you may see angelic beings like Chris Bledsoe. And even I asked. I don't know if you heard my interview with Whitley Strieber, and I made the mistake of bringing up religion and Chris Bledsoe, but I asked
Yeah.
him, I said, "Hey, Whitley, you had this really bad experience. I mean, your first experience was traumatic." And he keeps talking about how terrible it was and how painful it was and all this kind of stuff. And I said, "Whitley, before you had that experience, what do? You wrote horror books, horror
Yeah.
novels."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, "Do you think that had anything to do with it?" And he said, "Well," and then he picked up on Chris Bledsoe about the religion. He said, "We don't want to bring religion in." But that was my question. My question was, do you think that because you were a horror novelist, they said, let's give him a horror novelist experience? And he even says now he's still really into horror novels. And he likes to go and watch horror movies and stuff like that. And that's the whole thing, is this reflective quality that may be part of this whole phenomena. And so it comes down to be careful what you think. That's what uh, Brandon Fugel says. And, him and his brother, they're, Mormon guys, they come in and he says, we pray every time we come onto the thing. And then you had Travis Taylor. Remember, we went on the ranch. He said, "Oh, I'm a scientist. I'm a cool. You guys are all crazy, whatever." And then they give him a couple of shots with radioactivity. Remember that immediately, and suddenly he's come to Jesus. Now he's as crazy as everybody else. And man, take this thing seriously, and make sure you think the right way and stuff like that. And that's the whole thing. It's a teaching phenomena, that this what this phenomena is doing.
Yeah, when I had my trauma-induced out-of-body experience that almost simulated an NDE thing, I came face to face with like a light being, an
Yeah,
entity. But again, the idea of the teaching thing is that it's not just with the phenomenon, and I this is what I
yeah,
want people to kind of take away, right? And it's the reflective quality of the phenomenon, but what they're trying to teach us, I have to
yeah,
say this in air quotes so people can interpret that how they like, right? And this is, again, this is an interpretation. So I'm not saying this is a matter of fact, whatever, even though have come to this conclusion, is that what the phenomenon, these non-human intelligence or these beings are trying to communicate to us, that it's not just these interactions that are reflective. It's actually our entire reality operates this way,
yeah, yeah,
right? And this is when I came to the thing. I'm trying to put together my book and everything, and it's not a UFO book. It actually has more to do with the nature of reality.
yeah,
And this, again, this reflective quality is not just with the phenomenon.
yeah, yeah,
It's with the manifestation of your entire reality, and we're doing this on a collective level as a consensus,
yeah.
right? So our subconscious collective is creating the collective unconscious is manifesting our entire experience together. So,
And that's the indigestible.
yeah,
How do you go to people like where Semi Van points out 54% of people are reading at a grade six level or grade five level, and 21% of people are functionally illiterate in the United States. And how you're going to dump this on them? Because you go to people, and it's like I mentioned that thing where my son's friend comes, and he's just making conversation. Oh, I hear you write UFO books and stuff, and I heard they're releasing this stuff, and I start talking. And he stops me. He says, "Oh, hey, hang on, you lost me 3 sentences ago." And it's like you realize, like, you're not going to drop this on people. They have no clue. They have a basic idea that there's
well,
UFOs being seen, and that's it.
yeah, and so in my last talk with Jim, where I had Jim Semivan, Peter Levenda, I mean, he even got to this, right? Is where this idea of Maya, the illusion that we're in, right?
Yeah,
Which is in today's framework, you could say simulation hypothesis, where Tom Campbell, we're in the
yeah,
simulation, and Rizwan Virk,
yeah,
the simulation thing. It's just another modern framework of what Eastern traditions have been saying, is that
yeah,
we're in this kind of dream-like reality, and there's implications to that. It's not just a fancy idea. And again, these ancient traditions of like yogic or Advaita, the Buddhism, these philosophies are kind of telling you how to cut through the illusion of things, by quieting and calming the mind. So these fluctuations in our monkey mind slowly begin to slow down and clear. So that the mud in the water is settled, and you can clearly see reality to the level that we are able to. And again, that's why I had this whole thing about like engaging the phenomenon, right?
Yeah,
Because you can read books and study and chase cases and all this, but until you start having direct experiences,
exactly.
it's not going to stick. You're not going to
Yeah,
have that
yeah,
realization of, oh, shit or crap.
yeah,
That's what this is what's going on. And
yeah,
you have tastes of it, right? And then you have these download and
yeah,
integration periods where you get a download and then like it takes you months to integrate what is actually in that download, or it could take a year, years. You
yeah,
could come across something and like bam, the download like comes to fruition, right? Of what we're considering information, but it's there the whole time,
yeah,
right? And it's just
yeah.
our ability to tap into the right wavelength for it to reveal itself.
And that's part of what I got in my 2016 download, the difference between describing and explaining or believing and knowing. The only way you can know is to have the experience. Otherwise, you may be a guy with 6 PhD degrees or whatever, but if you hadn't had an experience, it's just your opinion. And I did tell this story about when I was 50 years ago when I was working as a bartender at the Faculty Club Lounge. The first warning I got from the guy who was training me as the bartender was, don't let these academics intimidate you. When they've had one too many beers, they're just like any drunk on the street. And this is how I realized that when I started dealing with these guys for a couple of years, that they're just ordinary people. And that's where you get the whole idea is the people who have had the experiences, who have been in the field, are much more valuable to listen to, because it's like you're talking about the Maya. So 5,000 years ago, the Eastern traditions all had this all figured out already. How did they figure it out? Because a bunch of guys sat in caves and shut their mind down in caves, and they got into the field and they were given the information of how it works. We're in this world where we're sort of busy doing stuff, and we don't really get there. And the occasional person gets in the field, and that's where it's so important for the experiencers in the UFO phenomena. Is I go through this whole thing in the paper, whereas you take the modern quantum physics is starting to catch up onto this. So we're going to end up being right about this as well, in this idea consciousness is primary, the Max Planck, this whole thing, nothing gets behind consciousness, and that all the major quantum physics guys that invented quantum physics all believed that consciousness was primary and that matter was secondary. The whole thing about the participant universe, John
Yeah.
Wheeler,
Yeah.
that you're basically creating it. You're a participant in how reality is being created. And what happened was that it got shut down because people wanted technology. You could develop technology with the quantum formulas, so it's shut up and calculate. Just do the thing. Don't worry about all these inconsistencies about what this actually means. We're not worried about that. We're just interested in doing technology, and we sort of push that to the side. But you can see it's starting to come in now. This whole idea that if you get into field theory, quantum field theory, this whole idea that there may not be a physical universe, that it's just fields, and then the electron, you're just measuring the field, the electron field inside the major field, and they're all one field, and we're individuals, cells in a body, but we're cells of a overall body, and the body is a cell in the earth, and the earth is a cell in the planet, and it goes on, and we're all connected. And that people who've had the experience, whether it's a psychedelic experience or UFO experience, I do the near-death experience. The next book I'm doing is on the near-death experience combined with the UFO experience, and you see this over and over again. Everything's alive, everything's conscious, everything's one, and these sort of concepts, that whether you're in Eastern tradition, whether you're in psychedelics, whether you're in the UFO experience, whether you're in near experience, you say, oh my God, they're all saying the same thing, and they're having these experiences. It's not the opinion on the outside that says, oh, you're making the illusion. The people who have the rational analytical stuff, you can take all the rational analytical stuff you want, and $1, and you can't buy a cup of coffee in a restaurant. And when I did the whole thing about the rational analytical mind, the left brain, what you basically get is this situation where, if you take a look at they call it the Terman study, started in 1915 at Stanford University, where Lewis Terman takes the 1,540 smartest kids in California, and he follows them through their entire life. Nobody Not one of them ever did anything creative. And it was sort of the, you figure, oh, they're really smart. Kids had 25% of the kids had IQs of 180 and above. You had to have 140 IQ to get into the study. And the only two they missed were two guys they were rejected from the study. One was Alvarez, won the Nobel Prize, and that camera, the other guy won a Nobel Prize. They're both rejected from the study. The most they ever got was the one guy was the head of the American Psychological Association. Otherwise, they were just ordinary people. They didn't create anything. And you start looking at the people who create things, whether it's music or whatever, it's people who are very creative. They're using the right brain. They're not very rational, analytical, and they're sitting down and suddenly an idea comes in their head and they run off and do it. And people don't realize this fact that there is this field that has the information in it, and that's why experience is so important. Because I believe that the intelligence, whatever this is, non-human intelligence, whatever it is, it's in this field. It's almost like, remember you interviewed one of this the guy, the psionic guys from Skywatcher, and he said he was told we come from that place that you would call the afterlife or something to
Right.
that effect.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's the idea that these people are in this field and they can come into our field, become physical, and then they go back into their field. And we got to realize this factor that if you get in there through the field, you have the experience and you have encounters with this being. I'm very interested in what you're saying because you're in the field, and that's where the information is going to be. It's not going to be corrupted like the left brain. The left brain, people know about this left brain interpreter. When you get two pieces of information, this is proved. When you get two pieces of information and there's a gap in the middle, the left brain is instantly fills that hole with stuff, and every single time it's wrong, it's never right. It'll put it in there, and that's the whole thing. Is it can be wrong, but when you get stuff that's in the field, people pulling stuff, whether it's channeling, whether it's through encounters with beings or whatever, that stuff is going to be very accurate. And you start to see across all these spectrums where everybody says the same thing. It's alive, it's conscious, and it's one thing, and it's all connected, and that sort of stuff. And you start to realize this is a very, it's complex, but it's very simple. The basic messages, and everybody's got the same message. It'll be different. It'll be individual. So if you have a dream, if you have a near-death experience, if you have an abduction experience or whatever, every single experience is going to be different, but it's going to be the same meme. It's going to be this formation. So they it's almost like the intelligence says, okay, you be a ghost, you be an abductee or an alien, you be this, you be that, and we're coming in, and because we're at that veil where we've got the quantum physics thing in our psyche is almost there, where we're starting to realize the mind is part of this thing. This thing is able to interact because our vibration collectively has risen high enough that we're able to pick this stuff up. We weren't able to pick it up 100 years ago. And the more we talk about these kind of things, the more people realize this. I think the more experiences that are going to happen. And that's this contact that I don't think there's going to be a landing. I think it's just going to be suddenly everybody's going to realize that you can make these contacts, almost like with the DMT now, where they're taking people and they can put the stuff in so they stay in the DMT state, so they can actually talk to the beings. Because they talk about, you go into the DMT state, and the elf is saying, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this, and they know you're only there for 5 minutes, so they want to show you everything. Take a look at this, and
Yeah.
now they're able to keep the DMT going into the bloodstream, so they can keep the people under for an hour or 2 hours, so they can actually interact with this intelligence that is in that field and try to bring that material back.
Yeah, and funny, like Peter Levenda said, like disclosure could be where, like, in one moment, everybody has like a telepathic
Yeah,
experience with like a non-human intelligence. Is all of a sudden, all in the same instant, there's a like a mass telepathic communication from a non-human intelligence, and that would be disclosure.
yeah,
Uh, and again, it's this idea, and I really appreciate the Eastern traditions
yeah,
because they have and again, Jim Semivan did mention this when we were talking too. Some of these other cultures, they have the frameworks
sure,
for this, right? And even on a mapping level of where there's like the astral level and
yeah,
the causal level, and these other traditions have, oh, well, you have these entities are on this level, and there's these other entities on this level,
yeah,
and so on and so forth, right? And that might not be entirely literal in a sense, but it's, I think, closer to the framework of um, where we can actually relate to and begin to understand what's going on, rather than, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, you can say, oh, they're from another dimension. It's like, well, what
yeah,
does that mean, right? But we're this field, we are the field. We're part of it. We're always in
yeah,
it. That's why the meditative thing definitely helps, right? But you can get a download or
Sure.
there's these old Zen stories of people having instantaneous, they stub their toe and they have this awakening experience, right?
Yep.
Satori, they have like an enlightenment experience where they now all of a sudden have this, they tune in to this greater
Sure.
realization of reality,
Oh yeah.
right? So
Yeah, you get that a lot in like the near-death experience people where people 40% of all people who claim they've had an interaction with non-human intelligence say at one point during their experience they knew the answer to everything in the universe. In a near-death experience, 31% of people in a near-death experience say at one point during their experience they were told the answer to everything in the universe. So the whole thing comes down to that all the answers are there, and that if you're say a being that gives you the answer, if you go there and they give you that information and then they say you're going to forget. You're not going to remember this when you get back. Oh yeah, well, no, no, you won't. You won't remember this. And they all you remember is I knew the answer to everything in the universe, but I don't remember what it was. And that means that the beings, whatever the beings is, whether it's a higher realm being, whether it's an alien, where they've got the answer to everything in the universe. They're not here to look at the plants. They know what's going on. They've got all the answers. They've tapped into that. And the other thing that you were talking about was this idea, like the Eastern traditions. We didn't respect the Eastern traditions and their idea of Maya because they couldn't build a cell phone. I mean, they're stupid people. They can't build a cell phone, but and yet they've got this material. And the example I always use to get an analogy how simple it is to understand is the story of my father, who was very sort of a hard-nosed guy, and he told my mother 2 days before he died, or a day before he died, that his father had come to see him. And my mother says to him, says, "Oh, really? So what did your dad have to say?" And my father said, "He was just here. That's all you need to know." And so my father was not, he was not goofing around. He was, and this is the whole idea. So the question comes down to, so when my grandfather, what did he put his atoms all back together and then come into my father's room? No, when you come into this world, if you're a soul or whatever, you can come in and manifest as whatever you want. And that's the thing. So if a dead person can come in and manifest as a human being, a physical human being, why are we having so much problems with an alien doing this, come into our world, that they are living in that realm and they come into this world, become physical or whatever, and then at some point they may crash or they may gift the bodies and the crafts to help us learn. And this whole idea that they can come in, we can, or Yossi Ronan, who I don't know if you've ever interviewed, this Israeli experiencer, and that's what they told him. When we come into your world, we take on a body. We don't need to take on a body. We can take on whatever body we want. You can do the same thing. You just don't realize it. And that's this idea that you can manifest as whatever you want. Or Michael Newton used to ask the people in the spirit world, because you have all these lives, and he said, "Well, how do you when you're talking to another spirit in the other world, how do they know who you are?" And he says, "Well, because you manifest whatever life you lived with them. That woman used to like me when I was a cowboy with a big mustache. So I appear as that when I'm with that woman. When I'm with somebody else, I appear as something else. And that's this in the spirit world, this idea that you are this essence. Remember who you actually are. You're the essence of the spark of God, but you can appear as whatever you want in that world. And if you can find a way to get into this world, you can manifest as whatever you want. Like you can manifest the hand, all this kind of stuff that they just have a better knowledge of how it works. But the knowledge is in the field. It's not in this world. We're sort of, 5 steps below the beings in the field. It's important to the experiencers because whoever's dealing with the intelligence, I believe you cannot solve this problem. Absolutely cannot solve this problem until you deal with the people who are dealing with the intelligence. You can, and actually James Lukatsky said this. He said you can study forever. You're never going to get anywhere with looking at UFO sightings. You're just not going to get anywhere because what are you going to learn? Yeah, there's something going on. There's crafts in the sky. They tumble. They look like they bend like tic tacs, but they bend, or they look like jellyfish and they got long tentacles. You can describe what you want. What's that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's not until you got somebody who's actually engaging with whatever's causing this phenomena and they're in the field, that's when you start to learn what it is. And what's happened what has upset me about the Skywatcher thing is even though they talk about the psionics guys, they doesn't seem like they respect them. And Chris Bledsoe told me that him and his family were asked to run the psionics program, and he said no, he didn't want anything to do with it. So they were reaching out to people, but when you hear it, they sort of always distance themselves. Well, the psionic people, they don't really get it right. We got 100% for success ratio, and they're downplaying the psionics thing. I think they should upplay the psionics thing and downplay the sightings in the sky. The psionic people are the people where they're actually predicting when the craft's going to come in, what the craft is saying. There's even some of them got messages from the craft as to what we're dealing with. That's the important part that we need to deal with. Forget about the lights in the sky. That's entertainment. It's good for history TV and stuff like that, and documentaries or whatever. But when it comes to figuring out what's going on, you've got to deal with the intelligence. And there are people like you and other people that, to me, it's like if you do not listen to these people, you are wasting your time.
Yeah, with the Skywatcher and everything, I think that people for a long time they've been trying to create this bridge between the science and, what I essentially always call the bridge between physics and metaphysics, right? They're
Yeah,
trying to bridge the gap of where you connect and you have consciousness kind of in the center of the whole thing, and you're trying to create this bridge through consciousness of the physics and the metaphysics, and or you can even say physical and non-physical realities. And it's a challenge, and we're not going to understand it until we embody it. And
yeah.
people are going to be watching this and say, "What does all this stuff have to do with UFOs?" And I'll just say everything,
Everything. Yeah,
everything.
exactly.
And when you realize that, you'll get it, right? And
Yeah,
it's like a Zen
yeah.
koan in that
And I
sense.
and I
And
don't think Skywatcher's got it yet. I because they're playing this game where we don't want to get caught with the woo-woo stuff. I mentioned this thing before. Like Soul has cut out the woo-woo stuff. We're not going to bring it in because they want to sell themselves to the scientific community and get research money and academics. They want to have academics. And we've done this for years where we bring in some guy who doesn't even believe in UFOs because he's got a PhD and wants to talk about UFOs. We bring him into a conference. It's like, what are we doing here? I mean, you got to realize that science is just a method. It is not a religion. It's a method. It says you get a hypothesis. You see something, you say, "Wow, I wonder if it's this," and you'd run experiments to see is it that, and then you do observations on the experiments that you did, and then you make a conclusion. And then when you got the conclusion, you say, "Oh, it's not this, it's this. It looks more like it's this." You run another experiment. You don't have to have the idea that material is everything is material. We're back in the Newton days where it doesn't exist unless you can feel it and you can touch it and you can measure it. And this phenomena, you're not going to be able to measure it. You're not going to be able to do any of that kind of stuff. And we have to get used to that it may actually be a world that is made out of fields, that there's nothing. I don't know if you've seen that. Desta and I are going to talk about it. We're going to have this thing where Richard Feynman talks about this. And you heard me talking about this, but Feynman talks about the fact if you start to realize how the world works, this whole
yeah,
holographic universe idea, where he says he's just sitting there and he says, it's kind of weird. You see this woman jump into the pool and she's not very nice looking. So I will look at something else. And he says, and this person's jumping in the pool and this person's jumping in the pool and they're all jumping in the pool and these waves are all going in the pool. And then there's this little insect on the far side of the pool on a wave and he's bouncing up and down and he's got to figure out who jumped into the pool, where did they jump into the pool, and all this kind of stuff. And he said that's basically what's happening inside your head. So you got these two little holes, and you got waves going this way, and waves going this way, and waves going this way, and it's all waves. There's nothing. There's just vibrations. It's just there's all these vibrations and all this noise, and there's signals going this way, and then you got radioactive, gamma rays and X-rays and all this stuff. And he says, and it goes into the thing, and it gets constructed. And he says, just can you imagine? Just imagine. And then you get the brain. If you take the brain is all waves. So you got all these waves in the brain that are just waves and stuff, and it's interpreting these waves out there, and it makes a creation of what looks like a world. And you start realizing that, you realize it's just so weird. And I remember Desta talking about that. She said I mean, she couldn't sleep for a week when she read the holographic universe. This idea that there is nothing out there. It's a creation of the mind, and all there is. There's no color. There's nothing. There's just these waves all going, and the mind is able to put all these waves and create a thing. And that's when you start looking at that, then you realize this is how the UFO phenomena they maybe just waves and we're waves and it's just all these things and they're in a field and they're just vibrating at a different level and stuff like that. And that's this indigestible stuff that Jim Semivan talks about.
yeah,
When you start going that, you can see people's eyes rolling back. They're going like,
yeah.
"Holy cow!" And that's the
Yes,
way it is.
and so you just did this great short talk with Desta Barnaby on your channel and talking about the holographic universe, which is a book by Michael Talbot, which if you can I'll link it in the description. There's an excellent talk that he did with Jeffrey Mishlove decades
Oh yeah,
ago, before he passed, and j just excellent work. And Desta read the book, and it's like just from reading that book, you have an inkling of holy shit, like what the hell is reality? How
yeah,
are we perceiving it, right? And that's the thing. Okay, so people watching this might be here because they're interested in UFOs, but
Well,
You're not
Talbot
gonna
was in a UFO experience. He was one of Bob Hopkins' clients. So let's put
right,
that in there.
right. Yeah, and I didn't know that until you said it in that. I was
Yeah.
like, what?
Yeah.
So you're not gonna understand the UFO thing by studying UFOs. And Peter Levenda also famously said that as well. And you're the stuff that we're talking about here is you're getting closer to what is going on with the UFO stuff. And I know that sounds uh I don't know, inconvenient, right? Because you're people they hear about a UFO sighting or a UFO encounter and they just want to know their initial questions are very simplistic because they're just hearing about this stuff, right? Or they heard about a UFO sighting.
Yeah.
So the ontological, paradigm shift, so to speak, is a gradual thing because
Yeah.
you start off with, oh wait, there's aliens. Then you start
Yeah.
off or wait, what are the aliens? And then
Yeah.
and then it's like, wait, hold on, are they aliens?
Yeah.
And you gradually have deeper and deeper and deeper questions. And the deeper your questions go and the deeper your realization goes, the farther you take it and the more you realize it's not this being or this UFO craft, uh, or even psychic phenomenon. It's this entire consciousness,
Yeah.
nature of reality thing. So, again, a lot of people are just like, and part of the UFO narrative influence that's going on, and Kelly Chase, of Cosmosis, just did an excellent program on UAP narrative warfare. She did an excellent expose on that. I'll link that in the description too. But again, part of the narrative is, I think, trying to keep people's attention on aliens and physical craft, and even this idea of hybrids and this whole thing. And yeah, there's elements of that, but these are like the beginning questions of the UFO
Yeah.
phenomenon.
Yeah.
When you want to get to the heart of what is going on, you're going to have to go much further than that.
Yeah. And you did that with Semivan. Semivan is one of the guys I think that people should listen to everything and listen to it 3 or 4 times. That this guy, I think, is on the level. He got the 7 hour briefing, very high level briefing. And I remember you asking him. So you're asking him, and you're wanting UFO. So you got the briefing. What have they discovered? Oh, they discovered a little bit. And then you said, well, is it UFOs? He said, no, 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 they haven't discovered. And he basically makes that thing. He said, I'll bet you a year of my pension that they haven't got a clue when it comes to nuts and bolts. And so then you ask them, what was it? Well, it was kind of like psychic stuff. And that's the connection. There is this psychic component that is starting to wean into the minds of people, and they're starting to realize there's a psychic thing. And this is at the highest level where he's confirming this at a high level that psychic is the main thing. Or you mentioned the interview that Michael Talbot did with Jeffrey Mishlove. There's actually two. There's a short one, and the long one is even better, where he talks about the second part, where he talks about this reflective quality. And he
Yeah.
talks about it not in terms of UFOs, but in terms of poltergeist, that he as a young kid had this poltergeist that was haunting him in his bedroom. And he said, when I was in a good mood, the poltergeist would hang the socks off the
Yeah,
plants.
yeah, yeah.
When I was in a bad mood, I would wake up with needles and pin marks in my arm. And that's this reflective quality that it happens in poltergeist. It happens in UFOs. In fact, when you have a UFO sighting, then suddenly you get the people that have the UFO experience, and suddenly they're psychic, and they have poltergeist, and they have shadow people, and you start to see that it's all connected, it's all the same thing. And that's the mistake that we make, is that what they told Ray Hernandez when he had this experience where they pull him into the field and he has this wheel and has remote viewing and
Yeah,
psychic
yeah, yeah.
phenomena and
Yeah.
UFOs and all sorts of stuff, and the wheel is spinning, and in the middle is consciousness, and the beings say to him, you've got to quit parsing this stuff. It's all the same thing.
Yeah, and again, I want to encourage people to check out the Michael Talbot interview and his book, the Holographic Universe. And I mentioned this to you before we started recording, Grant. A lot of people don't realize with the engaging the phenomenon logo,
Yeah.
a lot of people see the Sunyata like Zen circle thing with the
Yeah.
X, which that has its own meaning and everything. But the background, right, is one of the most important parts. And the background, if people haven't realized, is a hologram, right? And that's like a nod to the or the inspiration of the conscious quantum hologram, which uh, somebody who was very deep into the theory on that was Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was
Yeah.
on the NIDS scientific and advisory board, right, for NIDS, and he had given presentations on the conscious, the quantum conscious hologram.
Yeah.
So that's you're getting into the deeper territory, but closer to the heart of what's going on with this stuff when you're,
Yeah.
delving into that aspect of
And
it.
the phenomena actually gives you a hints. That's what they're doing. They're giving you these hints. And you start to wonder, why is it doing this? And then there's a hint, and it's basically telling you indirectly through a visual or through a symbol as to what's actually going on. And one of the things was, like I said, I spent a lot of time with them studying the Mission Rama thing. So there was three big Zendra things that happened: 2014, 15, and 2020. So in the 2014 to 2015, Paula Harris was in both Zendras. So when I was with her, I got the camera. We went out to the site, and she showed me where the tree. And Antarell was standing by this tree, and he's 10 feet tall. And there's these two shorter beings but tall beings standing beside him and stuff like that. And that was the 2014. So I interviewed the people in the Zendra from 2014. I got the camera rolling. These people are talking about, yeah, I saw this 10-foot tall guy, and everybody was hearing a different voice. They were hearing a different message coming from this guy. And then in the one guy got in. He was a Navy guy, 25 years in the Navy, and he was a translator for Paula in 2015. So he goes into the Zendra and into this portal thing, and the being is there, same being or whatever, and they're all saying, "Yeah, I've seen him 6 times. I've seen him lots of times." I go, "6 times you've seen this guy?" And they follow this Ricardo guy around the world, and so from time to time he'll open it, and this Antarella is there. So anyway, the 2015. So I'm talking to all these people, and they said, "Yeah, he was a hologram. 2014 he was solid, but in 2015 he was a hologram. You could see the trees through him." And I said, "Really?" So then this Navy guy comes out, and I said, "So what do you see?" And he said, "Oh, I couldn't believe it. It was an extraterrestrial. I saw this extraterrestrial. I can't believe this extraterrestrials. I've never heard a UFO sighting. I can't believe it. There's actually extraterrestrials standing right there." And I said, "Yeah, he was a hologram." And was he? And he went, "Hologram? What the hell are you talking about?" I said, "Yeah, everybody said he was a hologram." I said, "Look, Grant, I was close enough. I could see the lines in his face. He was not a hologram." But everybody else was describing a hologram. So that's this hint. One year he shows up as solid. The second year he shows up as a hologram. And that's to give you the idea. What's really going on here? Is he solid? Is he physical? I remember even Ricardo went to him one time and he said, "Are you actually real? Are you actually a hologram?" And he poked him in the stomach. "Yeah, I am real." And at that point, he was physical. And he was poking him in the stomach. And that's this whole deal that you get these hints from the phenomena that start to tell you what's going on, that maybe it's not as physical as you think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good note to end it on here. But Grant, I got to have you back on in the next few weeks, and I got to have you back on too with Desta one time. So,
Yeah,
we,
Desta is like she's like George Hansen. She's one of the smartest people I've
yeah,
ever. She's I make the joke. She's got like I don't know how many thousand books, maybe 3,000 books or whatever. And unlike most people, you know how you have books, you go to the conference and you get the guy to sign the book and then you put it on the shelf. Nobody ever reads the books in ufology. She's read all the books. She's one of the
yeah,
few people I know who actually
yeah,
reads the books.
yeah, for sure. So,
Yeah, good. And I'll
well,
get you set up with George Hansen, which will be a
please.
real experience. He likes to chat and he likes to go for dinner and hopefully he's still active and yeah, I think you'll learn a lot from him. And if you get him on the show, you got a scoop because here's a guy who you may have to tape it in a restaurant or something, the interview, because I don't think he really has computer access.
Yeah,
But here's a guy who is 30 years ahead of everybody else.
yeah, yeah. And again, I did try to reach out to him a few years ago, so I'd love that. And thanks
Okay,
for coming on, Grant.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Your article is going to be coming out soon.
Yeah, it's a mini book, so it'll be out. We'll put it
Yeah,
up,
it's 40
but we'll
something
do a couple
pages
more
already.
podcasts on it. It seems to evolve. That's what happens. That's how I do research. I think you probably do the same thing. Is when you do a book or you do a PowerPoint presentation, once you start doing it, you start to learn new stuff. This pops in. Oh, I didn't know
Yeah,
that, and you put it
yeah,
in, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's basically what I do for my papers now because nobody reads the books. So you put it out, but it helps you sort it out in your head, and you learn
yeah,
stuff as you go through it. Like
yeah,
for example, today I learned that George Hansen, who I've known for years. I've been out for lunch with him numerous times. I didn't know I had a PhD degree. I didn't know that. I knew he was the smartest guy I'd
yeah,
ever met, but I didn't realize he actually had a PhD degree in experimental parapsychology.
yeah,
So
yeah.
thanks, James. Let's talk again soon.
Yes, sir. Take care.
Okay.